Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
I want to talk a little bit about dishonesty and cheating. So first of all, in order to get us thinking about this, how many people here have cheated since the beginning of 2012? Okay. Lied? Yes, of course. How many people have lied in the last month? Let me challenge you on that. At the same time, how many people here think of yourself as generally good, honest, wonderful people? And this is the conundrum I want us to think about. On one hand, we admit that we're able to be dishonest. On the other hand, we think of ourselves as honest people. How can we do both? Now, the standard theory of honesty and dishonesty is the rational theory. And the rational theory suggests that everything is about cost-benefit analysis. You pass by a grocery store and you ask yourself, how much money is in the till? What's the chance somebody will catch you? How much time will you get in prison? And you weigh the cost and the benefits. And if the benefit outweighs the cost, you hit the grocery store, you rob them, and if the cost outweighs the benefit, you don't. And the standard theory suggests that it's all about how much we stand to gain, probability of being caught, and time in prison. But it turns out those are really not driving much of dishonest behavior. In fact, in the US, we have the death sentence, and some states have the death sentence and some don't. But to the best we can, we don't find any differences in crime rate, which suggests that people just don't think about the long-term consequences, right? This theory is about people thinking about the long-term consequences. Oh, I might get caught. I might get time in prison. The reality is that people just don't think about long-term consequences in almost any area of our lives. Think about yourself, for example. How many people here in the last week have eaten more than you wished you would? Exercised less than you think you should? How many people here have SMS'd or texted while driving? Come on. If you think about it, all of those are behaviors that show that people really don't think about the long-term consequences, and we don't think about the long-term consequences in all kinds of areas of life, including dishonesty, which suggests that the ways that we think will curb dishonesty, like big prison sentences, are actually not going to be effective. So if that's not the right model, what is the right model? What does describe dishonest behavior? And what I would like to propose is that human beings basically try to do two things at the same time. On one hand, we want to be able to look in the mirror and feel good about ourselves. Well, that's kind of nice to be able to think of ourselves in this way. On the other hand, we want to benefit from being dishonest. Now, you could say you could do one or the other. You can either look at yourself as honest or you could benefit from dishonesty. You can't do both. Well, it turns out that thanks to our flexible cognitive psychology and thanks to our ability to rationalize our actions, we could do both. And as long as we rationalize our actions and as long as we cheat just a little bit, we can benefit from cheating just a little bit, and at the same time we can keep thinking of ourselves as honest, wonderful people. So imagine that rationalization is like a balloon or machine. And as rationalization increases, our capacity to rationalize increase, we can be more dishonest and feel okay about ourselves. And as our capacity to rationalizing decrease, it's harder for us to be dishonest and feel good about ourselves. So let me turn it to you and let us think for a few minutes together about what kind of things would get people to rationalize to a higher degree. What kind of things about our life in general would get people to more easily rationalize bad actions? Any suggestions? Think to yourself, yes.
That everyone does it.
That everybody does that. So before we talk about this, let me describe to you how we measure dishonesty. We measure dishonesty in a very simple way. Imagine you were all in the experiment. I would pass you a sheet of paper with 20 simple math problems, and I would say you have 5 minutes to solve as many of those as you can. I'll give you $1 per question. Go. You would turn off the page. You will start working as fast as you can. At the end of the 5 minutes, I will say, please stop. Count how many questions you got correctly. And now go to the back of the room and shred your piece of paper. And once you finish shredding it, come to me and tell me how many questions you got correctly. People do this, they count, they shred, they come to me and they say they solved 6 problems, we pay them $6. What the people in the experiment don't know is that the shredder has been fixed. So the shredder only shreds the sides of the page, but the main body of the page remains intact. We can jump into the recycling bin, we can find out how many questions people really solve correctly. What do we find? On average, people solve 4 problems and report to be solving 6. And by the way, it's not as if we have a lot of big cheaters, we have a lot of little cheaters. And I would like to argue that this kind of reflects what we have in society. Sure, there are some big cheaters out there, people who just go all the way, but there are very few of them. And in fact, the magnitude of dishonesty we most likely see in society is by good people who think they're doing good work, but in fact cheating just a little bit, but because there are so many of them, of us, this actually has a tremendous economic impact. So let's go back to your point, which is everybody else does that. So imagine we run the same experiment in here, but we hire an acting student, and we ask that acting student to sit in the front row, and 30 seconds into the experiment to raise their hand and said, "Excuse me, I solved everything, what do I do now?" And the experimenter said, "You solved everything, get your full payment, and go home." And you see that person. Now, if you're in the experiment, you're still on problem number 1. There's no question in your mind that that person cheated, right? There's no way they could solve all 20, but you see them taking all the money and going home. What would happen to your own morality? Lots more people cheat. But you could explain it in 2 ways. You could say, well, we just demonstrated that in this experiment there's no downside to cheating. Here, somebody cheated in an egregious way, walked out, nobody chased him, they had no downside to cheating. So that could be one mechanism. The second mechanism is that it's not about the cost-benefit analysis. It's about the fact that now you got a demonstration that somebody from your social group, somebody from your society is cheating, and therefore this is more socially acceptable. To distinguish those, we did a few things, but one of them was we dressed the acting student in a different sweatshirt. And here's the story. We ran this experiment at a university called Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. Everybody was a Carnegie Mellon student. Everybody wore Carnegie Mellon uniform, outfit, sweatshirt, and so on, the acting student including. In the second experiment, we dressed him up in University of Pittsburgh sweatshirt. This is a university nearby, which is kind of a competitor. What happens now? When a University of Pittsburgh student cheats and gets away with it, you still know that in this experiment you can cheat and get away with it. The cost-benefit analysis is the same, but now you don't get the social proof about it. What happens now? Cheating actually goes down. Right? So when we think about it, when other people are dishonest, it compels us to find other things as acceptable, but only if there are people within our in-group that we associate with in some general way. If there are people that we despise in general or don't think about as very good people, then it doesn't have any effect on us. What else would change? What else? Yeah.
If you think that the other people are stupid enough to set up something where you can get away with it or you can beat them.
Okay, so if you think that the other people are somehow not appropriate, not smart, and not deserving. So here's one experiment we did. We went to coffee shops in Boston, and we asked people, hey, would you do this experiment for us for 5 minutes for $5? Everybody said yes. We gave them the task. We explained to them what they were supposed to do to fill some paperwork. Then we came back 5 minutes later, and we said, here's your $5. Please count it and sign a receipt for $5. But we actually gave them $9. How many people do you think would return the money? None. These are Americans in Boston. No. Slightly more than 50% of the people returned the money, and you could decide for yourself if this is a high number or a low number. In the second condition, when the research assistant explained to them the experiment, they interrupted in the middle. They pretended that somebody was calling them. They picked up the phone. They ignored the participant, and they talked for 12 seconds to John about pizza. Hey, John, what's up? Yeah, pizza. Great, tonight, 8, my place, ciao. Put the phone down, went back to explaining the results. Now when they gave $9 to people at the end of the experiment, what happened? Almost nobody returned the money back. Now, if you were a participant, you could think to yourself that you're kind of doing justice to the world, right? Here is somebody that just offended you, and you're restoring karma by taking their money back. What else would get people to be more dishonest? Yeah? Relationship maintenance. Tell me a bit more. You want to keep friends with somebody, yeah. This is actually quite important, I think, relates to Ian's work. We have lots of human values. Honesty is one of them. There are other human values in question as well. What happened when those values collide? But here's another thing. Imagine that you have a friend, and imagine that you care about this friend. And now, if you're dishonest, this friend gets to benefit as well. What would happen? So in one experiment, we did this. We measured how much people are dishonest when they stand to gain from their dishonesty. And we measured what happened if the other person gets to gain to benefit from their dishonesty as well. And what we saw is that when somebody else gets to benefit, people are more dishonest. It's kind of the Robin Hood syndrome, right? I think this is, by the way, why politicians cheat so much. Right? And if you think about it, when politicians lie, they can probably very easily tell themselves that they're lying for the benefit of other people. If you only vote for me, this will not just be good for me, this will be fantastic for all of you. It could justify lots of things, and by having this justification, being able to be more dishonest. What else? Yeah?
When nobody else gets impacted by.
When nobody else gets impacted by, yeah. I think we all recognize that if we took 10 cents from a petty cash box, we could not help but think of ourselves as thieves. But if we took a pencil, we would feel very differently. In fact, if we took 10 cents from a petty cash box and went to buy a pencil, we would still feel like thieves. But taking a pencil is kind of removed from money. There's all kinds of things about it that don't make it feel as real. So here's the experiment we did on this. The first condition was just like the one I described before. You solve the problems, you shred a piece of paper, you come to the experimenter, you say, Mr. Experimenter, I solved X problems, give me X dollars. In the second condition, people shred a piece of paper, come to the experimenter and say, Mr. Experimenter, I solved X problems, give me X tokens. And we pay people in pieces of plastic. They take these pieces of plastic, they walk 12 feet to the side and change those for money. So in fact, when they're looking into somebody in the eyes, they're lying for something that is one step removed from money, but it becomes money very quickly. What happened? In our experiments, people doubled their cheating. By the way, this for me was one of the most worrisome experiments we've ever created. Because if you think about it, we're becoming a cashless society. We're becoming a society with a higher distance between us and the consequences of our actions. Credit cards, electronic wallets, mortgage-backed securities, stock options. Think about all of those things that represent psychological distance between us and the people, us and money. Could it be that as the distance increases, people can be dishonest, but at the moment don't think of themselves as doing anything dishonest? You don't see who exactly you're affecting, even though you might affect the whole global economy. That it might be very easy for people to take steps in that wrong direction and still think of themselves generally as not doing anything terrible. So we talked about what gets people to cheat more. What would get people to cheat less? The same way that we thought about rationalization is going up, what would get rationalization to go down? What would get people to be able to rationalize to a higher degree, to kind of scrutinize their own actions? Yeah?
Being reminded of values.
Being reminded of values. Yeah, we've done that in a couple of ways, and it's really quite, I think, optimistic. So we went to UCLA, Los Angeles, and we asked about 500 students to try and recall the 10 Commandments. By the way, none of them could remember all 10 Commandments, and they invented lots of interesting ones. But after trying to recall the 10 Commandments, when we gave them the same opportunity to be dishonest, nobody was dishonest. In fact, even when we take self-declared atheists and we ask them to swear on the Bible and we give them a chance to cheat, they don't cheat. So this suggests that there's something about reminders that the moment we think about morality, even if it's not our own moral code, all of a sudden we are kind of supervising ourselves to a higher degree. We're more thoughtful about our own actions, and as a consequence, we let ourselves get away with less activities. So this is no offense to the Catholic in the audience, but we went to Italy to talk to real Catholics. We went to talk to Catholic priests. And we said, from an economic perspective, we don't understand confession. Please explain it to us. They said, if you can confess and be absolved, shouldn't you cheat more? Shouldn't you cheat on the way to confession? If all you wanted was to minimize time in purgatory, it looks like that's the winning recipe. The priest said no. So here are three theories how confession might work. One theory is that you think to yourself, I want to rob this convenience store, but I'll have to confess. It will be unpleasant, the priest would think badly of me, and this added cost makes the whole thing not worthwhile. That's one possibility. We don't find any evidence for that version of it. Another possibility is like the Ten Commandments experiment I told you about. You come out of confession and you feel good and wonderful about yourself, and for a little while longer, you want to keep that feeling of being good. We find some evidence for this. But the most interesting version is the following. When we give people hundreds of opportunities to steal and to cheat over time, small amounts, but hundreds of those, what we find is that people are slightly dishonest, balancing, feeling good about myself, cheating a little bit, feeling good, cheating a little bit. And then at some point, many people switch and start cheating all the time. Now, if people cheat a lot all the time, why would they ever stop? Why would you ever stop? If you think you're going to hell in the Catholic version, why would you ever stop? In fact, the Catholic confession might have actually stumbled on this. This might be a really good idea, that if you are cheating a lot, maybe you need to be able to open a new page. So we did these experiments. We do a non-Catholic kind of confession. People cheat a little bit, they cheat a lot. We give them a chance to say what they have done badly. We give them a chance to ask for forgiveness from whatever spirits they believe in. What happens after those two actions together? Cheating goes down. Opening a new page does seem to be very successful. Now, of course, you can think about the South African Reconciliation Act as a kind of a version of confession, where a country basically stood up and how do you move from an apartheid aid to a post-apartheid aid? There's no smooth transition. But if you stand up and you said, here's all the horrible things we've done, and we're really sorry, maybe it can open a new page and at least give you a chance for transitioning. And this, by the way, I think is something that religion figured out, and the question is, how do we put it into civic society, right? Should we create opportunities for bankers, for example, to ask for forgiveness from time to time and start a new page? You know, we, from the outside, we look at crime, and we look at like 12 years or 8 years of crime, and we say to ourselves, we could have never done that. But I've talked to many criminals and judges and lawyers, and to most degree, actually unanimously, none of them thought about the whole sequence. They thought about the first step, and they could rationalize the first step. And then they thought about the next step, and the next step, and the next step. And then at some point, it was just too late, and they were doing just things to cover themselves up. And this is exactly the point when people realize something bad, that confession could actually be helpful. And I think it's really interesting to ask the question is, how do we as a society move to a situation that allow people to open new pages? People would transgress. There's nothing that we can do about it. How do we get people to feel clean again and able to act on their goodness? The final thing I want to tell you is that we've run this experiment in other countries as well. So the first country I went to test was Israel. I was sure that the Israelis would cheat more than the Americans, but they cheated just the same. Francesco Gino, my Italian collaborator, said, come to Italy, we'll show you. We'll show you what the Italians can do. We tried Italy, the Italians cheat just like the Americans. We tried Turkey, we tried the UK. By the way, my research assistant said that they never were cursed at the same quality and frequency as in the UK, but the British cheat just like the Americans. No difference. We tried China, and we tried Canada, because the Canadians usually think that they cheat less than the Americans. They cheat just the same. Now, here's the strange thing. Everybody who's traveled feels very strongly that in other countries, cheating feels very differently. The dishonesty feels very different in other places. How can it be that in our experiments, we find no differences? And here is my current interpretation of this, current understanding of this. Our experiments are detached from any cultural context. They're general, they're abstract, they're not embedded in any previous interactions. And because of that, they measure the general human fudge factor. They measure our ability to rationalize across different behaviors. And you know what? We're not very different from one another in that regard. But that doesn't mean that culture doesn't matter. Culture does matter. But if you have a kind of a fudge factor, culture takes domain by domain specific activity and can say, you know what? In this domain, we accept a higher fudge factor. Think about lack of compliance with taxes. Some countries said more percent is okay. Think about, anybody here French? Nobody. Think about infidelity, right? If you're French, this is not a moral issue, right? I mean, it's not part of the moral fiber for many people. So basically, and again, think about even within a country, how some people think about downloading illegal music. It's not a moral issue. So culture is important, but what culture does is it works on a domain by domain specific way and changes how we view that domain in our general moral view. We did find one cultural difference. Now, when we run these experiments, we run them in one of two ways. We either go to universities and test university students, or we go to bars. When we go to bars, we assume that people who go to bars are kind of the same everywhere. And when we go to bars, we also change the payment so it's proportional to the cost of beer. So we pay people such that for every 4 questions, they can get the amount of money that they can buy them a glass of beer in that particular place. So that's kind of our international currency. So the one time we found this difference was we went to a bar in Washington, D.C., which is a bar where congressional staffers, junior politicians, hang out in. And we went to another bar in New York City where bankers hang out in. And this was the only time we found the difference. So what do you think? Who cheats more, the bankers or the politicians? I was sure it was going to be the politicians, but actually it was the bankers. The bankers cheated 2 to 1, twice as much. But I should point out that these were junior politicians. They were congressional staffers, so maybe there's room for growth as a continuation. Let me just summarize with the following. If you think about it, this is really, the whole thing is a question of conflicts of interest. Right? And conflicts of interest mean that we have a pool to see reality in a certain way, and we could justify our view. Imagine that you like a particular football, soccer team, and you go to a game and the referee calls a call against your team. Is there any way but for you to think the referee is evil, vicious, stupid, blind, something like that? Of course not. You can't help but having your motivation influence how you see reality. Now replace your team with $5 million or with something else, and you could see how the same forces would get you to see reality in a biased way. So imagine you were a banker a few years ago, and imagine that I paid you $5 million a year to view mortgage-backed security as a good product. Could you help but seeing them as better than they are? Probably not. Now, I'm not saying that you will shift your opinion from thinking that they are terrible to thinking that they are wonderful. And I'm not saying that in your heart you would know that they are terrible, but you would tell your clients that they are wonderful. But you will probably shift your understanding of them. And what if everybody around you thought that they were great as well? Now, you could shift your understanding further. And what if they were difficult to compute and you were sitting there with a big spreadsheet and you would different calculations and parameters and estimators, and in the bottom you would see their final value, but it would also reflect on your end of year bonus? Wouldn't you shade your evaluation even further? And this is actually quite important, because if you think about the whole financial crisis, we've taken people and we put them in situations which basically are guaranteed to blind or at least to distort their vision. And we expect people to overcome that. You know, we all have a tendency to think of people as good or bad. And we say as long as we kick the bad people, everything will be fine. But the reality is that we all have the capacity to be quite bad under the right circumstances. And I think in banking, we've created the right circumstances for everybody to misbehave. And because of that, it's not such a matter of kicking some people and getting new people in. It's about changing the incentive structure. That because unless we change that, we're not going to get forward. And the last story I'll tell you is a story of my own about conflicts of interest. So as you can see, I was badly burned many, many years ago. Quite a few years after I got out of hospital, I come back for a checkup. And the head of the department catches me and he said, Dan, I have a fantastic new treatment for you. You don't hear that every day, so I go with him to his office. And he says that the left side of my face, when I shave, I have stubble. Everybody does, and my hair is black, so it's very visible. But the right side of my face, because it's burned, has no stubble. I have no hair. So what is his suggestion? He's going to tattoo the right side of my face to match the left one. So he says, go home, shave, and come back. And I go home and I think, you know, what do I want it to match? Like the morning shave, the after 5 o'clock shadow? How do I maximize the number of hours in the day when I'm going to be the most symmetric? When does it matter? Anyway, I go home, I shave, I come back to his office. And I say, you know what, can I see some pictures of people you've done that? And he said he can't show me the whole face because of privacy, but he shows me little pictures of cheeks. And you know, sure enough, they look like cheeks with little black dots. Then I said, what happened when I grow older? What happens when my hair becomes white? He said, oh, don't worry about it, we can laser it out when the time comes. And then I said, you know what, I don't think it's for me. I just don't feel comfortable with it, let's not do this. And then he turns to me and he said, Dan, what's wrong with you? Do you get some pleasure from being non-symmetrical? Do you enjoy looking different? But, you know, this was kind of shocking because I was in hospital for almost 3 years. He was my physician for 3 years. And I've never got this level of guilt trip over a particular treatment. Anyway, I leave him and I go to his deputy and I said, what's going on? And he said, well, we've done this for 2 patients already. These are the patients I saw their picture. And you need the 3rd one for an academic paper. And that was kind of ideal, right? Half the face burned, half the face not. It was kind of really good for that particular paper. Now, here's the thing. This guy was my physician for almost 3 years. He was a fantastic guy. This right side of my eyebrow, he spent, I think, almost 9 hours creating it. He took a Doppler machine. He tracked the blood vessels. He tracked a particular piece of skin and a blood vessel going down. He isolated them, pushed it under the skin just so I have half an eyebrow. He started working like at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. So he worked almost the whole night, creating me half an eyebrow. A fantastic, amazing physician. I have lots of thanks for him. At the same time, at those moments, despite being a wonderful human being and caring about me in general, he was a prisoner of his own conflicts of interest, right? He couldn't see reality from my perspective, and he was trying to coerce me into doing something that was good for him and not for me. And I think we need to understand that. We need to understand that in the right circumstances, we could all try to coerce other people, and we all are likely to be coerced by other people, even if they don't see that they're doing it for their own benefit. And that's the tricky thing about conflicts of interest. They're everywhere, they're pervasive. We're building systems with conflicts of interest, but we don't see how they work. And particularly, we don't see how they're influencing us. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.